Book 1, Chapter 13. It's early 1987 and a couple of years since Ben's return to London. He and Zoe are in his kitchen packing large cardboard boxes. Ben, you really think I would have survived, all that kung fu training? I think you'll find you mean Tai Chi and the internal martial art. Tai Chi, whatever. All I'm asking is, unless you're just indulging me, do you really think I could pass for having learnt all that stuff you've shown me out there? Ben hasn't looked up for a while. So he continues rearranging one of the boxes that he should have already packed. For some reason it crosses Ben's mind that Zoe would make a wonderful mother. Well, Zoe, and not wanting your head to get even bigger, and especially since you've had a foreign devil as a teacher, I must confess your forms are... Picked up flattery out there too, eh? They look at each other and smile. There is a slightly uncomfortable pause before they again busy themselves with sorting and wrapping. Fear not the woman that has practised 10,000 kicks, but fear the woman that has practised one kick 10,000 times. What was that? It's just something that's been running through my head since I came back. That you're more odd than ever. Ben pretends not to hear. It's strange, Zoe, when you return from somewhere far away like I did. Even after all these years, you sort of pick up where you left off. You may think you've changed, but the place might have other ideas. Zoe looks across at Ben. He does not return her gaze. Are you saying when you came back from travelling you wanted to be a totally different person, Ben? Ah, a person. Zoe rolls her eyes. You'd have struggled to pick up those skills here. Not sure the West is set up to help us develop our will, unless it's in the pursuit of stuff. Ben is holding a green teacup in one hand and its matching saucer in the other. The cup is well worn, the saucer chipped. He hesitantly wraps the saucer in some brown paper. As soon as he's done, he starts unwrapping. Zoe notices. A special one? Ben looks down at the lifeless items, regarding them as though they were beloved pets, not just second-rate tableware. One of Granddad's favourites. Thought I'd be okay giving these things away, but even old cups have so much of him left in them. Zoe has approached Ben. She begins to rub his back. It immediately reminds him of how Zoe was always there during their painful school years. They're important, Ben. Keep them. Not a cup and saucer, they're memories. Ben nods and straightens. Zoe's hand falls away. You're right. It's really hard not to keep thinking that I could have done something. Zoe has returned to the packing, but Ben's comments compel her to look at him again. This time both hands raised to her hips. Her soothing tone is replaced by one of concern and exasperation. You're not talking about his trouble with the local kids, are you? Ben can sense Zoe's stare and decides not to face her. Placing the cup on the saucer, he slides the jiggling pair onto a working surface. I told him I'd go and get that milk later. I should have... Ben begins to rifle through another cupboard. Look at all these cups. The man lived on tea. Well, tea, ham sandwiches, and more than the occasional brandy. Took too much out of him, fighting them off and giving them an ear bashing. Zoe has hardly moved. One hand remains on her hip and the other is poring over teaspoons that live in a silver tankard next to the kettle. Despite her actions, Zoe hasn't completely taken her eyes off Ben. It was nothing to do with you, all right? Nothing. You were everything to that man. Without you, even when you were thousands of miles away, he'd have given up long ago. All that kept him alive while you were away, with the occasional visits from me and, more importantly, the knowledge you'd still need him when you came home. He was a secretive man, you know, your Granddad. No matter how much I pressed him for embarrassing stories about his boy, he never gave anything up. Ben continues to look down at a faded mug in his left hand. It's only really fit for the garbage. Even Grandad had stopped using it. Gradually, this cup found its way further and further towards the back of a kitchen cabinet, kept company by cobweb-covered miniature bottles of spirits. The piece of crockery reminds Ben of winter evenings as a child. Times when he would secrete himself under his guardian's arm on the sofa, while the old man slurped tea and listened to the Archers, on what he only ever referred to as the wireless. It's so weird him not being here. At least he's being buried next to her. You're definitely coming. You're well aware I hate funerals. I remember getting freaked out even when you told me bits about your nanas. I'll try to face it for him and for you. I'd want a pretty good excuse for you not to be there. Zoe turns away from Ben and begins proper examination of the teaspoons. They'll be reunited then, Ben. The room falls silent. Ben walks over to a small black radio and presses a button on its top. The middle of an indiscernible song destroys the contemplative atmosphere. Ben struggles to find the volume dial and sets it to 3. Zoe, you'll never guess what he wanted carved into his gravestone. Zoe appears engrossed in weeding out the worst of the tarnished teaspoons. She has already made 3 substantial piles to the far side of the kettle. What? Yes, it did. Yes, it did what? Ben looks up at the ceiling and draws a big breath. Nothing ever happened. That's what it says on Nana's grave. And I remembered something more from that funeral. I'm certain there used to be a crescent-shaped background to those words on the gravestone. I thought about that day in the grave for years when I was a kid. That's all I could do because Grandad and I never visited it again. Maybe he couldn't face the pain. Don't blame him. There was something really odd about the whole experience that I could never shake either. I suppose for me you could argue it was just a powerful moment in a child's life, you know. Even as a young kid it always struck me as odd that whenever Grandad saw a woman doing something a little out of the ordinary, he'd say, "They're all ruled by the moon." That was the 60s, though. I tried to speak with him about Nana after she died, but all he'd ever say until the day I lost him was, "Your Nana had the last word." Now he's finally got his own back. No, he hasn't. What do you mean? He's just started an argument that will go on for all eternity. You've got a point, Zoe. First time foxes came to visit too. That's weird. What is, Zoe? Nothing. Really? Let me see. Ben takes the silver tankard from Zoe. Wow, can't remember noticing that before. There's a faded crescent moon on this. Using his free hand, Ben spills the remaining spoons like metallic rain out onto the draining area and scrutinises the faint design. Interesting. The radio has gone quiet. Ben sets the tankard down and moves towards the silent contraption. Just as he gets close, the unmistakable sound of drums and maracas kick in. Turn it up, Ben! Ben knows why Zoe has reacted like this. Their musical tastes were mostly different growing up. However, along with their favourite Bowie songs, in the Rolling Stones, especially in Sympathy for the Devil, the pair found a track they could both relate to. Time and again Zoe would tease Ben about his strangeness, his plans to flee and become something special, and he would turn the tables by reminding her how much she too despised normality. He twists the volume knob, just a shade clockwise, and then returns to the centre of the kitchen. They listen to the song without saying a word. As it draws to a close, Zoe speaks first. "Still amazing. Could have been written yesterday. I always used to say that was the reason our friendship lasted. It's because of my sympathy for you, my very own devil on my shoulder." Zoe smiles, returns some spoons to the tankard and begins sorting through a pile of moth-eaten tea towels. Ben ties a knot in the top of the plastic bag. It's a hymn to him. Sensing the mood might darken, Zoe chances her arm. "Your best friend's coming round today. They want to get their hands on your trust fund." "What? Ha ha, very funny. I mentioned Tash and Gideon could take a few bits for their new flat, that's all. Trust fund. Of course, all those millions under management someone's failed to tell me about. Anyway, Tash sounds posh, and I thought you said she was one of those blue blood, the leaky roof brigade. What's she want with your cast-offs?" "Leaky roof brigade?" "You know, big pile somewhere that's falling apart. These days no one can afford to look after those places." "Whatever am I going to do with you, Miss Angel?" "I think you'll find it's Mrs. Parker." Zoe quickly tries to minimise the impact of her words by working her way through some knick-knacks, holding them up for Ben's approval, before covering them in paper and deploying them in various boxes. "I suppose Gideon's okay, but there's something about Tasha that gives me the heebie-jeebies." "So you're going to take flight, are you?" Zoe bites her bottom lip. "I should really be off. Even with you being back a couple of years, Jason's never got used to me having male friends. Especially not not old gits like you." Ben begins fishing something from the Doctor Who cup in his hand. "I don't want to damage your relationship, Zoe." He drops the cup. It smashes across the kitchen floor. Ben is left holding a dark, sticky bottle. Ignoring the broken crockery and the salvaged bottle, Ben appears momentarily transfixed by one of his wrists. Zoe can't resist seizing on the breakage for some teasing. Apparently unnoticed by Ben, a silver object has been ejected from the splintered vessel and has slid underneath a sideboard. "That's not like you, Ben. Literally letting go, are we?" Zoe checks her insensitivity in the unlikely event that the Doctor Who cup was Granddad's prized possession. "Not an important one." "That was heavier than I remember it." Ben looks at the broken pieces. "Important in a different way. Baker became my favourite Time Lord when I finally got to watch him." Zoe looks relieved and sidles over to Ben. "Maybe you didn't pick up as many skills as you thought. You know what they say, those that can do and those that can't. You're not only my teacher though now, are you?" She tickles Ben's underarms. "Some unfortunates, well, their parents at least, are actually paying to wrap themselves in knots and learn alien-sounding languages. Get off! Get off!" Zoe bends and retrieves a dusty circular object from its new hiding place. "What have you got there?" Not sure." She winces as though for a split second she had hoped to keep her find secret from her companion. Piece of shrapnel, maybe? Wow, it's weightier than it looks." Zoe attentively regards the object in her hand. "No way. This can't be the pocket watch. The one your granddad spent years looking for and never found." Ben freezes. Zoe wipes the metal with a yellow cloth. Once the light covering of dust is gone, the silver case sparkles. She goes to open it, but it is snatched from her grasp.
All right, Ben. I only wanted to see what the face looked like.
Ben is trembling as though opening the case would have been akin to pulling the pin from a grenade.
Sorry, Zoe, it's just... For some reason, it feels like a gift from him. From Granddad, a parting little something. I'm not trying to be... There's nothing wrong with wanting to open it alone. I know what it means to you. Wonder how long it's been there. Here already? Told you, they love you.
Ben hurriedly pockets the heirloom.
I'm sure they said later than this. Couldn't wait to see their best friend.
Ben answers the door. Tasha and Gideon march into the small hallway, as though it was their house and Ben was the guest.
Tash and I are sorry for your loss, mate.
Gideon goes to give Ben a conciliatory pat against his upper arm. Ben flinches slightly, and in doing so triggers a series of well-aimed and not entirely playful attempts at body punches from Gideon. Given her recent schooling from Ben, Zoe notes that the strikes look accurate and well-timed. The new owner of 40 Ample Street doesn't appear overly concerned. In fact, his relaxed demeanour is only tested when Gideon almost connects with a three-finger jab to his throat. For an instant, Zoe's heart finds a new home in her mouth. The horseplay's finale finally arrives with an imperceptibly fast sidestep from Ben that sends Gideon hurtling into the nearest wall. Ben seems surprised by his own speed. He may have lost even more of his steel-wire muscularity in the years since returning home, but, if anything, his reactions appear more finely tuned than ever. Well, recent breakages aside. Rubbing the beginnings of a puffy lip, Gideon affects a brave face and a poorly executed Prohibition gangster-style accent.
One day I'll cut you down, creep up on you and bang!
Ben stares into Gideon's eyes. The mood does not feel comedic. Zoe nudges Ben in his less than svelte midriff. The atmosphere returns to one of taunting laddishness.
Gideon, when you're big enough you'll be too old.
Zoe looks startled by Ben's turn of phrase.
I remember Granddad saying that to you, Ben. Actually, he looked like a pretty decent boxer, as I remember. And he was old. Well, he was getting on even back then.
He was old, Zoe, but
as he used to say on a daily basis, Navy champion 3 years in a row.
Tasha has evidently had enough of this claustrophobic hallway and male posturing.
I see this is already turning into a testosterone-driven afternoon. Why don't us girls have a stroll around the garden? From memory, it's a bit of a mess. Perhaps we can give it something of a woman's touch, Zoe.
Zoe likes the thought of being out in the garden, but it dawns on her that that would leave Ben and Gideon inside, and there have already been enough accidents today.
I was just leaving.
Tasha rests her fingers on Zoe's forearm and looks into her eyes.
Don't go. We hardly know each other and you're always running away. Not me, is it? What about if the chaps go into the garden and use up some of that energy? We can spend some time chit-chatting in the kitchen, you know, the sort of thing men believe women are meant to do. If that's okay with everyone's favourite kung fu man, that is.
Zoe takes a deep breath, managing to remain uncomfortable looking, even after slowly letting it out.
I could stay a little longer, but be careful about calling it kung fu, or heaven forbid karate. Tai Chi, right, Ben? Or should I say internal martial arts?
She moves towards him, pushing her fingertips into his triceps. Ben motions to Gideon with his head in the direction of the garden. The pair walk through the kitchen and out back. Ben looks as though he's suddenly realised how unattractive what he has always thought of as just the garden actually is.
You sure you and Zoe haven't got something, going on?
Ben lets out an audible sigh.
That's not a no,
Gideon looks at Ben's land.
You didn't tell me you had a break-in.
Break-in?
Well, someone's tea-leafed your mower and the rest of your gardening equipment.
Gideon laughs, theatrically loudly, then dabs at his puffy lip. Very funny. Gideon eyes the humps of earth that cover what should be a garden. Then he does something that Ben can't remember ever having done. He walks across to the lower of the two side fences and glances into the neighbour's garden.
The beasts only have love for you, mate.
Apparently now bored by the whole molehills deal, Gideon wrenches a bare branch from a nearby tree and picks up a pockmarked apple from the ground. He uses the makeshift bat to smash the majority of the fast splattering fruit beyond the garden's furthest fencing. There is the sound of breaking glass. Gideon flinches.
Oops!
A startled ginger creature shoots from behind a compost heap at the end of the garden and scurries towards a slightly raised shed. Gideon hunts for more apples. Ben watches the quivering nose and whiskers of the animal appear at a gap towards the front of the dilapidated little structure.
I reckon you got some hard-working animals out here, mate. Either that or you've been busy hiding your treasure.
Back in the kitchen,
Zoe, I'm so glad we got away from the boys. All that machismo.
Zoe turns the radio down and starts further rearranging the contents of some boxes, pushing those already complete from the centre of the room into a corner.
I'm sure Ben wouldn't mind if we helped ourselves to some tea and maybe a biscuit or two.
Tasha sticks her nose up in the air and shudders, as if the very thought of allowing anything to pass her lips in this environment was akin to having creepy crawlies in her underwear.
You must have a real soft spot for Benjamin to be willing to drink from one of those, Zoe.
Tasha points to a nearby pirate head-shaped mug. Not only is it laughably kitsch, years of use have left a stain on its formerly white interior. Zoe lets out a giggle and draws her top lip down over her front teeth.
OK, Natasha, let's forget the refreshments.
Zoe walks over to the taps and washes her hands.
Gideon may have taken a bit of a blow in the hallway, but he looked pretty proficient to me. Ben can handle some rough and tumble. After all that time torturing himself and who knows where, but I hadn't realised Gideon had trained too.
For the next few moments, despite the sound of Zoe scouring the sink, a song playing faintly in the background and the occasional pounding of scorching hot water on stainless steel, Tasha seems strangely contemplative before...
My family didn't approve one bit, Zoe. They made it clear that my Gideon was from the wrong side of the tracks and only potentially useful for short-term fun.
Zoe stops dead, turns off the tap and swivels to face Tasha. Tasha continues.
No lineage, you see. Well, not the right sort for them. He's got a pretty decent mind to go with that body, though. Chance in 1,000, coming from where he did. I always tell him that he got into Cambridge because he's built like an ox, and that's the only reason he got me.
Tasha winks at Zoe. Not for the first time today, Mrs. Parker feels a wave of nausea wash over her. Zoe squats and twists slightly away from Tasha. She starts rearranging Ben's cutlery drawer that has been pulled out onto the floor. Tasha continues.
If university entrance was based on academia alone, he'd have been off to... what are those places called? Oh, that's right, a polytechnic. You know, where they take 3 years to teach thickos how to wire a plug. Shouldn't be cruel, should I? A girl like me that spent all that time chanting in an ashram and learning 100 ways to cook a lentil. Why don't we have a real drink? I think I spied a few miniatures in that cupboard. The spirits should kill off anything unwanted. I'll grab one for you if you like, but I don't really feel like a drink. Worried you might pounce on a certain Mr. Hopes, are you? What with being a married woman, your little angel at home wouldn't be pleased if he got to hear about that.
Zoe grimaces but does not respond, other than by turning almost violet.
Perhaps it wouldn't be the first time, you naughty mare. Don't worry, you know your secrets are safe with Natasha. Everything changed for Gideon and me after your Ben suddenly disappeared from our home in India, you know. We shouldn't have been surprised, I suppose. He often pulled that sort of trick, but this time he didn't come back. His departure coincided with our then master going back into silent retreat.
Tasha takes a deep breath and fiddles for a while with the gold-encased diamond earring.
To be fair, that place was already beginning to fall apart. It doesn't help when the main man keeps on hiding himself away. Mice can start to gnaw at things in the absence of even a small tiger. Gideon and I soon left too, drawn to the land of the rising sun. He fast became the star pupil of something of a big deal in the martial arts and spiritual scene in Hokkaido. The guys on that island couldn't believe that a Westerner was so eager and so strong and flexible. I suppose all that time sitting on the floor in India couldn't have done Gideon's elasticity any harm. Being without a decent chair close to crippled me.
Tasha pauses, checking that Zoe has found her quip amusing.
It wasn't long, though, before I almost lost him completely to a certain small Chinese.
Zoe's fake smile dissipates, and she halts her polishing of various knives.
Gideon had an affair with a Chinese girl?
Tasha smiles, casts her gaze around the kitchen, shivers, and washes her hands with nothing more than air and friction.
A girl? Oh, no. Some of the Japanese master's students heard of a Chinese monk travelling not far from the dojo. Somehow they cajoled him into meeting and what they referred to as exchanging techniques with the big man. Before devoting himself to spiritual practice and teaching, our grand fromage had been something of a Nippon warrior legend. A throwback to the days of the samurai, no less. He accepted the fight by any other name as if it were no big deal.
Zoe recoils at Tasha's use of speech marks.
The day of the match, everyone was called to gather around. The consensus was that the younger Chinese would have his flowery techniques crushed by a true martial veteran. But when the Japanese master shook his wrists and feet...
Tasha flicks out her fingers and then her narrow-tipped ankle boots, the bottoms of her black trousers swishing from side to side.
The Chinese monk got into a handstand. He rested his feet on a wall and proceeded to take one hand away. Then he rose up onto his 5 fingers and removed his thumb and more fingers. He stayed there motionless, supporting himself on just 2 iron digits.
Tasha makes what looks like a stiff-fingered peace gesture.
On seeing that supernatural exhibition, the Japanese master decided to talk his way out of the situation. No shame in that, I mean, who wouldn't? But from that moment on, Gideon was smitten. Took me forever to pull him away from following that Chinese monk. He left me in Japan, while he picked up some of those skills as a wandering apprentice. By the time I finally got him back, the Japanese master had died, and that school had fallen apart too. I got the feeling the Japanese master never really got over his backing down from the fight that never was. I ask you, Zoe, what's the source of boy's fascination with all that stuff.
The colour drains from Zoe's cheeks, and the beginnings of perspiration appear at her brow. She looks down at the boxes on the floor and regards the room and her companion as though having emerged from a lengthy bout of sleepwalking.
Can't say, Tasha, sorry. Got to do something I should have done with Ben years ago.
Zoe near leaps across to Tasha and, having given her the briefest of hugs, rushes into the hallway and grabs a coat from the banister, then flies from the house. For a while, Tasha is motionless, then, as though being shocked into action, she tears towards the back door and shouts into the garden.
Gideon! Zoe's done a Benjamin!
A few hours have passed since Zoe's departure. Despite Ben being alone in the kitchen, it is anything but quiet, not least due to a blaring radio. The boxes have been removed, and he dances around, gripping a metal spatula in one hand and occasionally shaking a small frying pan containing 2 sizzling eggs in the other. Stopping jiggling, he begins talking to himself.
How could I let him get so close with those No call from...
His stilted monologue is interrupted by the telephone beginning to ring. He turns off the gas and, leaving the pan on the hob, jogs from the kitchen into the hallway.
Hello?
The caller speaks.
Who's calling?
A fast voice jabbers again into his ear.
She did pop by for a little while, but she left ages ago. 3 hours, maybe more.
The person on the other end of the line continues to talk, fast and loud. Ben moves the receiver away from his ear, turning his attention to the grease collecting and dripping from the spatula's silver edge onto the bare boards. The voice ceases. Ben talks into the mouthpiece, the earpiece now horizontal to it, far from his head.
If I hear anything, of course.
Ben replaces the receiver and walks back to the kitchen. The radio is playing Cat Stevens's Lady d'Arbanville. Cupping the contents of his trouser pocket with his free hand, he looks up at the ceiling.
Master, prepare yourself to receive angels.